All right, so kicking off the new year strong, our good old Helldivers CCO Pilestat went trending on Twitter, as well as having multiple gaming articles written about a tweet he replied to that had to do with the boogeyman of DEI. Now, not only is Pilestat teaching a very simple lesson when it comes to gaming, but also the business of gaming. What's hilarious here is the point went entirely over multiple gaming journalists' head as usual, as well as a few others. All of them, trying to educate, the founder of Helldivers, the guy, who was part of the group who came up with the game, what his game was about, because apparently he doesn't know the theme of the game that he helped come up with. So I figured let's go ahead and cover this because not only is it hilarious and entertaining, but he just left some tidbits of knowledge for the business of gaming. So December 31st, he tweeted, with 10 minutes to 2025, what are your expectations and desires for what the next Arrowhead game will be? I am working on the high concept, but I would love to hear your speculation. And somebody responded and said, never add DEI to your game. And what Pilestat responded with was, if it doesn't add to the game's experience, it detracts, and games should be pure pursuit of amazing moments. Now, I think most people will agree with this. This is a very simple statement. This isn't even politics related. This could be in relation to anything. Now, someone responded and said, how would DEI have benefited Helldivers 2? And he said, I don't like labels, but mankind is united in its extreme xenophobia on Super Earth, #inclusion, so maybe that's DEI. I really don't care. Make good games. Don't make a contemporary political statement. Now, this is the part that many people misunderstood, and it went completely over many people's head. We had a person here quote tweet him and said, no politics in the game where you invade planets for oil, fight the spread of communism, and declare war on a race for possibly having WMDs. Arrowhead will never beat the haven't played their own game allegations. And this is where he clarified, and I bring this up because it's brought up in the articles later, and he said, well, that's the theme of the game. I meant outside of the theme. Sorry for being unclear. Also, it's more Cold War / Bush era politics that inspire HD2. Now, I actually think he was very concise and didn't even need to clarify because he said, don't make a contemporary political statement. And there's this little thing called Google where you can Google words that you may not understand. Now, I'll admit, even I did this. Okay, I know that contemporary politics is like the current thing, but I even checked before making this video just so that I could keep my facts straight. And, contemporary is like current political stuff. And so this guy responded, there's a war over resources happening right now. Terrorism accusations still get thrown around casually. You're either blind or stupid. Now, I guess he's trying to say that Helldivers is a contemporary political game. However, let's not forget that Helldivers 2 is a continuation of the story of Helldivers 1, which came out 10 years ago, I think this year. And that game was based on Starship Troopers, a movie from the 90s. So if you have any knowledge of the game at all, and again, trying to tell the guy who worked on the themes of the game, it is definitely not a contemporary political statement. Like he said, it's more so Cold War / Bush era politics that inspire HD2. So we had two gaming articles written about this, one on Forbes and one on PC Gamer. And these are both very short articles, and they read very similarly, funnily enough. So the first one on Forbes, Helldivers 2 director, make good games, don't make a contemporary political statement. Heading into 2025, it seems that the debates about the video game industry being woke or anti-woke in various ways will not end and may only get amplified from here. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, is another buzzword thrown around, and now it's back in the form of the director of Helldivers 2, responding to a question about it, the exchange between Helldivers 2 creative director, Johan Pilestat on Twitter, and then it just quotes the tweets. Now, one thing that is very obvious here is they're calling DEI a buzzword. They're referring to the culture war on the topic of DEI, and I feel like they're implying that gamers are the ones who came up with this buzzword and started throwing it around to, fight their culture war. But let's not forget where DEI came from. This is an investment strategy that dates back as far as 2006. And it was companies like Blizzard who had a DEI checklist on their characters, ranking how diverse their characters were, how beautiful they were, their culture, their background, their race. They literally had a DEI checklist for their characters in Overwatch, by the way. So this is one of those, persuasive writing statements that Forbes articles tend to often do. Anyways, they quote tweeted the conversation, and then they said, in 2024, Helldivers 2 was held up as an example of a game being not woke, as it was just about soldiers killing bugs. But as Pilestat says, there is, of course, an undercurrent of extreme xenophobia echoing the sci-fi parable that inspired it, Starship Troopers. In terms of diversity and inclusion, that's just not really a thing in Helldivers 2 in the sense that there are male Helldivers and female Helldivers, and everyone's just wearing helmets anyway. The story is kill things trying to attack Super Earth. On the left, no one was ever accusing Helldivers 2 of being anti-progressive, namely focusing on the fact that it was actually very political, with that message focused on xenophobia and a government lying to its people under the guise of patriotism, which would technically be a contemporary political statement. Though I suppose if you want to differentiate between political statements and political themes, you could get off on that technicality. There are rooms for all types of games. No one is demanding Helldivers 2 comment on racial justice or LGBTQ issues, but to say don't make games relevant to the current political moment is a bit odd, to be sure, but of course they should ideally be good games if so. Helldivers 2 has seen a huge player surge in the wake of its update that has brought the Illuminate into the fight. Clearly, Arrowhead is gearing up for its next game. In addition to continuing to support Helldivers 2, I look forward to seeing what it will be, political or not. Now, if we really want to talk about who's furthering the culture war and who is keeping this stuff alive, it is clearly gaming articles like Forbes. And the point goes completely over the writer's head because Helldivers is not a contemporary political statement. It is definitely political, but Pilestat did not say don't make political games. What he did say was don't try to make a contemporary political statement because it's very obvious that people are not a fan of that. Now, to make this very clear and very simple, there is a giant difference between a satire, which has political themes, versus a political statement, or what I would more so describe that people dislike is activism. And pushing your game to be some political activist statement. That is what people dislike. And if we're getting down to the nitty gritty, that is probably mostly what he is referring to. And let me give you another very simple example. Okay, so Helldivers is a satire, right? You fight for Super Earth. It's managed democracy. It's obviously Super Earth are the bad guys, right? Obviously, it's xenophobia, fascism. Okay, like everybody knows that. And that's the thing. Everybody knows it. It's a satire. It's funny. We play into it. We role play, and it's all a joke. But what if Helldivers lore and Helldivers story constantly told you, you don't understand. The game is about fascism being evil. You actually aren't supposed to support Super Earth. Didn't you guys know that Super Earth are the bad guys? Like, imagine if Helldivers just constantly droned on that fascism was bad. If this was the Helldivers lore, it would just be extremely patronizing because I'm like, dude, it's obvious. We get it. We're the bad guys, okay? That's why we like playing, because it's fun to pretend to be the bad guys in a video game where you can do bad things or, role play as the bad guys. Everybody knows it, everybody gets it, and I would guarantee you that if the Helldivers lore constantly said this, constantly droned in this message that fascism is bad, they just constantly told this to us, I guarantee you they would lose players. Now, if you haven't played the game very recently or you're not part of the community, you might try to disagree with me. However, if you are a part of this community, you know that people love role-playing the lore of Super Earth. For example, there is literally an entire YouTube channel that started when the game came out. They've reached 80,000 subscribers, simply recapping the major orders, which is basically the story of Helldivers. Another example I could bring up is when they were doing crossovers. They did the collab recently with Killzone. Before they did that, Pilestat was commenting on crossovers, and many people were saying they didn't want them because it would be immersion breaking. Many people enjoy the satire and the lore of Super Earth, and they love fighting for Super Earth's citizens in the game, okay? I don't know if I have to clarify that for some people. And constantly droning on some activist message or, again, contemporary political statement, as Pilestat said it, would be very patronizing and push people away. Now, the second gaming article, I'm not going to read this whole thing. It basically went over the same thing. For example, it started off the same exact way. PyleStat's initial statement came in response to a user on X who urged him to never add DEI, an acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion that's become a high-profile bugbear for the anti-woke crowd. Another example of either the point going over this journalist's head or just completely, misconstruing it on purpose to push their own culture war. And PyleStat actually responded to someone who told him this is bait, and he said, thank you, I guess, for letting him know. But even so, what society will we become if we distance ourselves from each other for the fear of others? Discourse is the foundation of a healthy society, and diversity of opinion is how we collectively decide where to go. Conversation is the relief valve of society. Now, this is another great message from him, okay? And he is just sending a few tweets here with knowledge bombs in them, to be honest with you. Like this is just good discourse as well as good conversation. A lot of people were saying he's going down the middle path and not trying to pick a side and maybe making people angry on both sides. But one person who actually quote tweeted who actually made a good point here, they said Helldivers 2 is clearly a satire on Bush-era global war on terror, American jingoism, and blind patriotism. Anyone saying they don't want politics in their media just mean they don't want politics that they don't understand or like. And I actually think this is a very good point because this is true. People who saying they don't want politics in their media, if they truly mean it, whatever, but most of the time, it's just politics that they disagree with or they don't understand. And this is another truth to the conversation. When you have an audience for your game, you need to pander to your audience to keep them coming back and keep them as your audience, or else they'll end up leaving because you end up alienating them. So this is actually a very true statement I agree with, and I think they do understand that it is a satire rather than a political statement. Most of the game's focus is on fun, and it's more so making, it's more so absurd on the politics themselves, rather than trying to push some message. So ultimately, this was just very entertaining for me to read over New Year's break while I was hanging out with my family, but there's just some very clear and concise things here. If it doesn't add to the game's experience, it detracts, and games should be pure pursuit of amazing moments. This doesn't mean no politics. This means that the politics that you do add have to actually add to the game, have to add to the lore, add to the story, add to this, add to that. And then the second thing, make good games, don't make contemporary political statements. If you are, an activist, a lot of times it can come off as patronizing and you can end up alienating your audience. And then finally, conversation is the relief valve of society. And I fully agree with this. I'm someone who likes to have conversations. This is a hot topic video we're posting on the channel. I could just alienate people by posting this. But I also agree that conversation is just a good thing to have. And one last thing to bring up that I don't think many people are thinking of is that, we just had one of the most catastrophic game failures of all time last year, Concord. And you might be thinking I'm bringing this up because it was one of the most catastrophic game failures of all time. But no, people are forgetting that Concord was a PlayStation game. It was meant to be one of their biggest cash cows. They invested all this money into it. It was going to be one of their largest franchises, probably I believe a live service game as well. But Helldivers is also a PlayStation game, okay? And it is now their largest live service game. It is most likely their cash cow at this point. I don't know of another PlayStation live service game that's out right now that's literally published by PlayStation. And if there is another one, it's not as big as Helldivers currently is. And what many people probably don't realize is we don't know what kind of conversations that PyleStat is having with Sony or on this topic, given that he is one of the original founders of Helldivers. He used to be the CEO, and he stepped down to a CCO position, but he is probably still very much so in touch with PlayStation all of the time, whether it's some sort of meeting or even press release. Concord was very much so on their radar, and one of the largest reasons for that game is it just felt like political activism to a lot of people. Whether it was or wasn't, whether you agree or disagree, that was the perception of it, and that was one of the large reasons it failed. Am I saying it's the only reason it failed? No, not at all. There was probably multiple, but it was definitely one of the big ones. Ultimately, what I'll say is there's definitely times where people are trying to call out DEI when it's not the case, and there are also definitely times where it is DEI and it's a checklist on corporate agendas, and it's very obvious when they do it. So I'm not trying to even take a middle road here. I do think DEI corporate checklists are a bad, horrible thing. But I do also think there's times on the other side when it gets a bit too extreme as well. And let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. This was just a fun, entertaining one. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out.